All right, well, welcome back to another episode of 1.73 Mission Over Measure. Today we have John and Joe Graziano with us. We really appreciate you guys coming out and being a part of this in the early stages of it. We've had a lot of great conversations so far, and we know that we'll have another great one today, just based on the banter we already got beforehand. You guys are already looking out to be a fun conversation. So I'd like to start us off with just introducing yourself and talking a little about your guys' business, what you guys do. Joe, you can go first.
I was going to let the older guy go first.
Thank you, Joe. My name is John Graziano. I am a CPA, personal financial specialist, and CFP. I founded my CPA firm around 1984 or 5 and quickly realized the need for clients that wanted their trusted advisor, which was their accountant or tax preparer, to also offer financial planning. So I opened or founded FFP Wealth Management around 1989, 1990, basically just to take care of my own existing clients that would come in asking for financial planning advice. 10 years later, the younger Graziano joined the firm that was already set up and poised for success. Joe?
I'm Joe Graziano, certified financial planner. So I joined John in 1993, 3 years after he started. And we offer comprehensive financial planning and wealth management services. Perhaps our niche, which has made us grow to, I guess we're floating around $3 billion today, is specializing in working with CPAs. So our niche is we train CPAs on how to offer wealth management. And the other thing we do is we place financial advisors in CPA or accounting firms to offer wealth management.
One of the
So-
things that set us apart, if you will, is because I am a CPA, it's not someone else telling you what they should be doing. It was us from experience saying, this is how I grew my CPA firm, and Joe's niche, bringing the marketing side in to say, let us help you grow that business.
Yeah, which is interesting because I would imagine, and certainly being a neophyte in that world, that there's a lot of folks that get into the business because, well, it's just they get right into the wealth advisory or financial planning side of things versus looking at it through the lens of, I would assert, probably a tax filter, which is interesting because at the end of the day, I would imagine there's probably a lot of folks that find themselves in situations with an advisor where tax considerations or the lack of taking tax issues into consideration actually ends up hurting their plan.
Yeah, I had no desire to ever offer financial planning, but the clients would come back year after year asking where could I go, and the old textbook for a CPA used to say, refer them to 3 different financial advisors. Usually it was a stockbroker, an insurance agent, and never really somebody doing what was in the best interest. So after years of failing miserably at that, I decided to do it small time and start rolling out financial planning to the tax clients, just not to have to basically send them someplace else and then come back disappointed because that insurance agent or broker I sent them to was doing what was best for them and not necessarily what was in their financial best interest.
Well, and I've got a few questions, but I want to stick with that on just a moment, John. So it's interesting because as we were kind of reading a little bit more about each of you in preparation for our conversation today, Joe, you had mentioned, unfortunately, your dad passed away some time ago, and that one of the things I read about was the so-called advisors, if you will, were perhaps dispensing advice or guiding that wasn't really actually taking into consideration some serious planning. So if you don't mind, just maybe share a little bit of backdrop on maybe your own personal experience in your family that had you say, you know what, we've got to do things differently.
I think not almost, a lot of times when someone passes away, immediately financial advisors show up because they sense that there's assets or money to invest. And I think that's what's worked out really well with us with working with accountants and CPAs, because a lot of times all the paperwork says check with your tax advisor first. So having the accountant involved in the process often protects the beneficiaries. And then from our standpoint, what's worked out really well is that most of the time those accountants will bring us in to help the clients figure out, what's the best decision. And then a lot of times the other part is that somebody doesn't have to make a decision for 6 to 9 months, that they could just sit back and wait, you know?
Yeah. So this may sound like a strange question, but if there's an ordinary world that many people find themselves in, for which that gets disrupted, where they would come seek you, what's that? Well, what's the disruption oftentimes in somebody's life that would say, I need to talk to the Graziano brothers?
So I'll jump in here. So I always think about it's money in motion, right? So just think about anytime money's in motion, somebody passes away, unfortunately, somebody gets married, they have a baby, someone sells a business, someone's buying a business. There's a whole litany. Someone is getting divorced. Like there's a whole litany of times where, or somebody's retiring. There's a whole litany of times when money is in motion. And one of the things that we have trained our accounting firms to notice is that people aren't going to generally walk in and ask for advice. They're going to say, we had a baby, my company downsized, I'm switching jobs, we're getting divorced. They're going to tell you something that's going to trigger you. And what we train our accounting firms is to recognize that this is a chance where money's in motion, or people have uncertainty and they need a financial plan to kind of run on to help them kind of make decisions about their future.
Yeah, I think the key, right, to elaborate on what Joe said is it's about trust, right? So they come to the accountant, maybe not saying that they need help. They don't know that they need help. They're looking for tax advice. But if the accountant or CPA can recognize, hey, they really need a financial plan. They need a financial planner. And I always say, what doesn't make us different is anybody could sell any investment, any insurance product, etc. But you need to know the person that you're choosing you can trust. They're going to be there today, tomorrow, in the future when you need them. And that's hopefully where we come in. And that's what separates us as well as the accountants that are licensed with us, I think.
What was one, I don't know if there's a specific moment, but when you guys, thought about that, making it a place where clients can come to you and trust you, were there situations where you were seeing that clients either weren't trusting you, or you were just simply saying, like, we can find a better way to go about this. We can make a more valuable connection with our clients. Where was that realization where the trust aspect really came in for your business?
Yeah. Henry, back to my story about my dad so Joe was in high school when dad passed away. I was out of college working for one of the big CPA firms. So I was mom's financial person, let's say, at the time. And our dad played semi-pro baseball. And when he stopped playing semi-pro baseball, he went to work for one of the big insurance companies. So my dad, let's assume, understood insurance. He later became a high school teacher, but the guy would always come by the house, the insurance agent, at bad times. Like whenever he had cancellation, he'd show up at the Graziano household. And my dad was sick for a bit, so he gave me a list, and it says, hey, I have these 3 life insurance policies. So if something ever happens to me, here's where they are, here's who to call. And I never forget, at my dad's wake, the guy came up. So my dad used to work for this gentleman who ran a big insurance company. And he said, hey, whenever you're ready, we could sit and talk about your dad's life insurance. And I said, I'm okay now. Dad was sick for a bit. We can go in the back. And he said, your dad had a life insurance policy. I said, no, he didn't. He had 3. And he said, no, he only had 1. And what he had done, the gentleman, is each time something new came out and he wanted to churn the account and make another commission, he convinced Dad, use the money in number 1 to pay for number 2 to pay for number 3. The first 2 crashed and burned. So Mom only had that 1. Now, luckily, he worked for, teachers, so he has state pension, stuff like that for Mom. But I thought to myself, if Dad didn't understand it, and he was a smart guy and he worked for the insurance company, then really even that agent only knows what that company wants to teach you. So he went through the training. He only learned what they wanted to teach him. So it's not that they're bad people, but that's all that gentleman knew. So our job is, when we say financial planning, it's not just insurance, it's not just investments. The harder part when Joe's training someone is he has to teach them on all aspects of a financial plan: estate plan, taxes, life insurance, disability, long-term care. And that's what allows us to do the best job. Let's look at the whole picture and come up with the best plan. But my dad always pushed me. When I got a CPA license, took me to dinner, said, now go get your CFP, because that business was just evolving, and Joe lived through it. I was already out of the house, but Joe lived through seeing Mom struggle, I think. So if somebody had done the right thing and she had 3 life insurance policies, life would have been much different.
Yeah.
John, what did you leave to start this business?
I was working. I went from a big CPA firm, one of the big now 3 or 4 firms, whatever it is, from Verizon corporate. I worked for Verizon in corporate finance, so I could do this nights, weekends, and for 2 years I did it nights, weekends, crazy hours, every night, every weekend, stuff like that. So I built it up. But I did the CPA firm first, full time, and this was an ancillary business. A client walked in and hit me over the head and said, "John, I want to open up an IRA." We'd open up the IRA and let them leave, not really doing planning. We call that product sales. Client comes in, asks for something, you do it, but you didn't look at the whole picture. And then the company that I got licensed with, and eventually Joe, taught us how to do the whole training, but more importantly, how to train and supervise other people. So that's what kind of took it to the next level. Instead of just doing it ourselves, let's teach other people and have advisors.
So what was that? If you go back to the large firm you were with, what were their definitions of success?
Much different, right? The CPA firm, you make you work your buns off forever till you make partner. But I didn't know that was such a great picture at the end. Those people were often miserable or had no family work-life balance. Or at the big phone company, that I was with, success was you moved up that ladder. But once again, same. I was not a big corporate guy. I always said I'm a great, self-employed person, but I'd probably be a lousy employee because I wanted more. So I did the CPA firm, and then added financial planning until eventually financial planning became more of my time. Wealth management side of the business dominated. And then, as you know, I sold the 2 CPA locations last year to focus on the wealth management.
Got it. And
What
Joe,
made you
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
What made you stick to your guns when, you talked about you looked down at the end of the line with all the people you were working with and realized that they were very miserable and stuff. Like, was that enough to convince you? Or let me rephrase. How did maybe the short-term success of, working up to a partner in that firm, how much did that weigh against the end of the line with how these guys ended up with, maybe them not having work-life balance or being miserable? Like, how, in your mind, were you weighing those 2 options, and what ultimately made you, decide to not go that way?
I was always the crazy one that I always worked, since I was 12, making money and stuff like that. When I worked at a supermarket for 6 years through high school and college, but I had another gig always selling something on the side to do something. So I always wanted to hustle, but it wasn't really. So when I found my love of, if you will, financial planning, helping people reach their retirement goals and be successful and help them, now you put the 2 things together, right? Now I could do something I love, but also the reward of helping people, especially when money's in motion or there's stress levels. I can't go to a doctor and say relax over a medical, but I could certainly help them, put them at ease when it comes to their finances or retirement planning. And there's no better feeling that when somebody listens to what you said and implements your suggestions, and you see, their spouse passed away, and now 5 years later they're paying for the kids' college and they're all good. That's a bit, or they're retiring and they have enough money to live and do what they want and travel because they listened to you for the last 10 years, 20 years. That's an awesome feeling.
Yeah, to see, it's difficult to articulate at times, but there's those moments where you see, like, I did make a contribution. I didn't do the work for our client, but the opportunity that gets created because of a relationship and the work that we have done on behalf, it's tough to put words to that.
A lot of the training that Joe could talk more about, but a lot of the training we go to, think about it. You walk in, you ask me for advice. If I don't do a good job presenting it and convincing you, let's assume I'm always going to do what's best for you. Our advisors are always going to do what's best for you. But if they do a lousy job presenting it, and you decide just to stay with the other person you're with or never move or do anything, or you make the wrong decisions, then in a way we feel like we have an obligation to, I should have did a better job to convince that client to do what I said because I knew the outcome would be better. Joe, you want to talk about how we help the advisors and stuff? Like, the presentation is important. They do a lousy job, you're not getting the client, and you could have saved their financial future.
Preston, you had another question or no? I think you had a
I,
follow-up
I like
question there.
I like John's
Oh,
question.
so I mean, the biggest thing for us is, training the advisors that in every presentation someone gets sold, whether the client's selling you or you're selling the client. And as long as you're ethical, sometimes you need to move them somehow to move into the right direction to help themselves. You know what I mean? So sometimes, if you're sitting with a client and have, 5 kids and they say they don't need insurance, and if you just let them off the hook, it's a problem. So my top screeners even reminded me on certain things to follow up with certain people to say, hey, did you do this? Did you take that step? Did you take that step? So a lot of what we provide is kind of coaching them to make the right decision for themselves. And sometimes, you really have to stay on certain people to make sure they do what's best in their own best interest for them and their families.
My direct neighbor right outside you go out my driveway or in his driveway, always told me when I was younger he was going to buy life insurance from me because he had 3 kids and stuff. When he lost weight, when he stopped smoking, never did it. He died 9/11, never having bought that extra life insurance. And $1 million life insurance would have cost him under $1,000 a year because he was younger. If he lost the weight, if he stopped smoking. And I often thought I should have forced him to buy the insurance, pay the extra, because he would have been rated overweight, smoker, or whatever. And then we could have redid it when he lost the weight and did everything he said. Now, fortunately, the 9/11 settlement helped. They're fine. We're still friends with the family and the kids and stuff like that. But that's an example of I should have been more forceful and convinced them that you have to buy it. Overpay, yeah, it's going to be triple the price. Who cares? And then when you lose the weight in a year, then we could have redid it.
Yeah, that's and there's a fine line you probably encounter there, John, right? Where you see somebody's likely making a poor decision, and that how far, if there's a line, how far do I step across that line to say, Preston, what are you thinking? You've got to do this now.
Yeah, and so I always tell people, let me be the most honest and upfront with you. If you tell me I'm a jerk, that's okay. I could live with that, right? But I shouldn't live with letting the person off the hook, as Joe mentioned. I just did one last week. Client came in. They hate their other advisor. They're not monitoring their accounts. They've lost money. They're underperforming and stuff. I present it, and they came back to me just saying, well, we feel awkward leaving that other advisor. The other advisor hasn't contacted you, helped you in 10 years, but because it's your sister's friend or something, they don't want to switch. What sense does that make? You're risking your retirement because you feel awkward in making that conversation to say, hey, thank you for being my advisor for 10 years and doing nothing, but I'm switching. It happens enough. But, so how should I improve my skills then not to have that happen?
Right. Joe, what were you doing? I'm going to change a trajectory, direction a little bit. What were you doing before you joined John?
I was in college. Yeah, I took my investment. I was playing tennis, Division I tennis, and I was taking my securities licenses while I was still in school. So my winter break was taking classes, my spring break was taking classes, and then I graduated when I was 21, I think, and I started.
So this wasn't, when you were in school, this wasn't a question of I'm going to get out there in the world and experiment with some things and see what I like. You were crystal clear. I'm going in this direction professionally.
Well, I had job offers to work for some of the big accounting firms and some private businesses because my degree's in accounting as well. So I graduated in the spring, started here, and it really wasn't much of a business. I mean, it was really slow. We didn't have much. It was only like 3 or 4 of us. There wasn't much business, and it was 3 years after John started the business. There wasn't a lot happening here. It was small and slow.
Ouch.
There
Ouch.
really wasn't even financial planning back then, Preston. It was kind of like it was the beginning of time.
That's funny.
They just invented this thing called the stock, Joe, right? When you graduated
Yep.
college.
They were using typewriters, Henry.
He was an accounting major, Preston, and getting these other offers, and he's seen the success of the wealth management side, and told me I had to tell our mom that he wasn't going to pursue accounting, which was a more stable, future, let's say, than doing this wealth management thing that was really just becoming wealth management, like he said.
Yeah. So what's going on with St. Peter's? Like, was it the entire Graziano family?
Two of us.
Oh, two. Okay. And how many?
We went to the same high school right down the street from St. Peter's, and it was drivable. We didn't have. I paid for my own. Joe paid for most of his. So it wasn't like we were not doing this. Like our kids were very fortunate to go check out colleges. I applied to St. Peter's and another school right down the street. I was going to one of those two.
Yeah. Joe, what was most at risk for you in joining your brother? Because John's firm was probably not the only firm or potential opportunity out there. Or sorry,
Yeah,
John's
there
in.
were
No,
there were
it
a
was.
lot stronger opportunities. I mean, I remember when I started,
That's
I worked 70 hours a week, and my first year I made like 17,000, whereas job offers were 45 to 50, and that was the same for the first 3 years. Like, so it was
let's
really, really hard, and there wasn't much structure to the company. I mean, it was just like we had to figure things out as we went. There wasn't like financial planning software like there is today. You were doing stuff on a typewriter with whiteout. I mean, it was painful. I mean, it was slow and painful. And finding clients was really, really hard back then. I mean, we moved, it was very, very slow. Yeah. It took a long
one
time to
thing.
get up and running.
One thing we did right, Preston, right from the start is when Joe joined, we had this thing for new advisors. You had to have 15 appointments a week. 15, with the idea that out of the 15, some are going to cancel, some are going to be no shows, some aren't going to be worth it. So I was just telling the story of one of our training meetings today with the young advisors. He came down and said, "Hey, I'm happy I got 12 appointments next week." And I'm like, "Good, you only owe me 3 more." But because we joke a lot, but because we stuck with that, and Joe got paid the same as anybody else here, any other advisors. So it was commission based back then. There was no base. He joked. He said he made 17,000. My son, my brother-in-law, came into the business years later. Same thing. They had to earn it. There was no guarantee base and stuff. But because we did that, I think that made it much more successful. And when we recruit somebody else, what do you question the compensation? Joe went through it. My brother, everybody else went through the same. So because everyone was treated equal, that's what made the success. It made him have to work, you know, and because of that, you start off slow, but then you build up and you do very well long term.
Joe, what
So,
made you stay on the ship instead of jumping off and taking those job offers right away? Is it the long term vision that John just described, or
I
is it
liked
deeper than that?
yeah, I liked what I was doing in financial planning. So if I didn't stay here, I would have went someplace else to do financial planning. The other thing, it was really the beginning of financial planning in the world. Like there wasn't quote unquote a lot of software, there wasn't a lot of technology. So the industry evolved very, very quickly. And then the other thing that made life a lot easier was in 1999, we started working with other accounting firms. Because early on, John was primarily working on his client base. We were finding clients outside of the client base. Then in 99, we started bringing in other accounting firms. So that like increased the volume that we were doing quite a bit.
We learned it was trial and error too, I should say, because I neither one of us ever worked for another wealth management firm, so we needed coaching along the way from different places to say, we doing it right or wrong. It was more trial and error, which would have helped the firm go a lot quicker if we maybe had worked someplace else, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe we would have learned wrong bad habits if we worked someplace else. But the need for both of us, trustworthy and hustle, you know, if you can't teach someone trustworthy and hustle. So Joe's going to hustle and be trustworthy, then we can grow it together. And somewhere around that time he mentioned, we realized our niche was going to be working with accountants, you know, and we've grown on that thanks to other coaching programs and Preston as well. How do we grow that business?
so that's a topic. Well, you mentioned you mentioned the 15 appointments per week, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there's a level of accountability and discipline that's required to actually, and I really appreciate your feedback when somebody comes and says, "Hey, John, I got 12 appointments. Great. What are the other three?" It reminds me of I had a big win, a big sales win years ago in another business. And the manager I was working for said, "Preston, that's great. You know what the worst thing could be that I could say to you right now?" And I said, "No, Christopher, what's that?" He says, "What's next?" It's like celebrate for a moment and then get back to work. There's I'm hearing that as you're speaking to, there's a level of accountability and discipline, hustle, if you will. Is that something that you can instill in others, or is that something they've actually got to bring to the table?
You know, I really believe, the interesting thing is you had said, right? I focus much more on milestones as opposed to goals, right? A goal is an end, a milestone is a process along the way. So when I do one-on-ones every month with all the advisors here in the building, my role is sales and marketing. And a lot of it is not discipline, it's they have a lower standard. So one of the questions I ask all of them is, what's your personal standard? So if you want to do well, 5 appointments a week is not going to hit our standard. So what's your personal standard for yourself? And everybody sets their own standard in everything that they do, whether it's their fitness, their health, their business, their career, their learning, their, everything. Everything has a standard. So I always ask them, hey, what's your standard? Is this up to your standard? Is this going to reach your goal or milestone?
That's an interesting perspective. So in other words, rather than asking me, Preston, do you have the discipline and accountability to do this? You're really simplifying it by asking me, what standard would you set for yourself? And either that's going to match or mirror, or even exceed the standard you believe is appropriate, or it's going to be insufficient. What happens if it's insufficient?
Well, part of it is we have our minimum that we require, but historically, most people want more out of their lives, even if they don't admit what they really want their standard to be. I mean, most people walk around life settling, right? They accept the conditions that are given to them. So when you start talking about standards, you say, hey, it's your own standard. So, and here what we do is I always tell the advisors, hey, there are some people here that can manage 50 million. Some people manage 100 million, 200 million, 500 million. Somebody can manage a billion. It's your personal standard and what your commitment is. And we will kind of adjust, right? Everybody's required to have a certain minimum, but nobody's required to have 300 million of assets. And that's going to be your personal standard. And what I measure is, I always use the example of the thermostat, right? At some point, the thermostat's going to click off and you're not going to hustle, or you're going to hit a new ceiling of complexity where you can't get through it, and it may take you 2 or 3 years to work it out, but it's your personally set standard. So we're going to be okay if you're hitting our minimum standard, but the upside is, it's your own standard.
Yeah, Preston, my concern always is that if they don't work under those auspices, then and they don't hit it, it's okay. They're happy with it this year, next year, but then 5 years when they see somebody passes them by, then all of a sudden it's our fault or the company's fault. No, we let you meet your standard, instead of what we would have liked you to have done. And you should be making double or triple, but you don't see that immediately, right? It's you're putting in the hours, the work to build that client base. So in 3 or 5 years, you're doing really well. So I don't want to lose people. I always tell Joe, because they think they're doing okay. I can't make them work and do those 15 appointments like Joe did when he started. We could encourage them. We could use that as a story. I didn't give Joe any business. They're always your brother. Or my
That's
son
for
works
sure.
here. It's your son. It's your son. They went and got their own clients and their own business. So, I want to see those younger people be successful, but they have to want it, right? I can't make them want it. And I just don't want to lose them in 5 years because they were okay, but they didn't hustle enough in the early years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, over the course of doing these episodes, we've the title is Mission Over Measure, and the kind of bumper sticker version of that is not holding yourself to the measures that you'd place upon yourself and looking farther out in the future. Like, what's your mission? What are you meant to do? Like, whether it doesn't matter what kind of car you drive, how many clients you have, this, that, or the other. It's like, what are you meant to do, and how can you push through those measures that you could place upon yourself? And here you guys talk about, your business and how you mentor your employees. It really sounds like you're calling them to overcome their own measures, because when they get stuck in their own measure, whatever that ceiling is that they hit, then they, like you said, they get complacent in it and they don't want to do anything else. So it's interesting hearing this, because you're almost introducing a new measure that's, going to push them on a different mission. It's this interesting balance between the measure of, oh, like it's a negative measure. Oh, this is my ceiling. I can't get any more. It's like, well, actually you can. Here's the new scale. I know you can accomplish this. You just have to want it. So that's it. We always discovered an interesting perspective or angle on the kind of mission over measure title in every episode we do. So I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but just hearing what you guys are talking about, that seems like to be a really cool aspect of it.
it's hard to
What I
balance. It's hard to balance that. I want them to succeed. I want to push them as much as we can without making them feel like we're pushing them out the door. You know what I mean? I want you to be able to thank me 10 or 20 years from now to say, Joe pushed you. Joe made me have those 15 appointments. And I'm making this really good lifestyle for my house, my family. I have a work-life balance. You can have all that. We did a training meeting today, and people say, "Oh, I worked last night." Oh, you had one appointment last night. Do me a favor, make 3 appointments last night, and then take the day off to be with your family. You don't need to have an appointment every night where you're getting home late. Do 3, especially now with technology, and we're doing a lot of Zoom appointments, right? Make 3 appointments, 4 appointments. Don't drive someplace for one appointment when you could have been home. Book them. That's what the 15 was. It was 3 to 5 appointments a day. And somebody canceled, it's okay. I'm still here. I'm still making money. I'm still making a good living. But anyway.
Well, it's an interesting perspective too, because you're really not, to your point, John, you're not setting the measure for them. You're actually, and Joe, I love the question. So what's your standard? Share with you your standard. And it's one of those where, how do we say it? It's a look in the mirror for me, if I'm that person, and I get challenged by or confronted by my standard may not be measuring up right now.
Well, there's also a saying, you can never outlive your self-image, right? So your self-image sets your standard, and you can never out-earn your self-image, right? So when you think about that ceiling of complexity, people have questions, am I worthy enough as far as income? Do I have the capability? So whatever your self-image kind of automatically sets the standard. And you have different standards in different phases of your life, right? You have multiple roles, if you will, in your life. So that self-image will set sort of your personal standard, whatever aspect it is, whether it's health, career, etc.
Yeah. I think that's where the role of a mentor would come into play to kind of push you over that self-image, those doubts, because during the course of this conversation, to me, it seems like you guys really play the role of mentors in a lot of different people's lives, whether it's your employees or your clients. And, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the hero's journey, the Joseph Campbell, storytelling thing. And at every point in a hero's journey, they meet a mentor that shows them the ropes of the new adventure they're in. So, your clients, it's like someone dies, they come to you, you're the mentor, you're showing them this new unknown world of, life without them and how to work beyond that and, be in a better spot tomorrow than they are today. And same with your employees, teaching them that, you can push past this self-image that you have, this standard. So playing that role of mentor, I think, is extremely important. And so I want to ask you guys, what were there mentors in your own lives that kind of helped you propel yourself to the next level over those doubts of your self-image or whatever it may be?
I mean, for one of the greatest things that I did was one time I went out and saw, so you think about this, I went out and saw an advisor who was making $5 million a year at the time, and it was just their habits are totally different. So that's what I don't think people realize. They're not necessarily smarter. That's the one thing I always tell people. Like an advisor in our world, an advisor or any industry you find, you assume that they're much smarter, quicker, etc. But they're just generally, for the most part, they're just outworking you, and they figured out a whole bunch of shortcuts. So like I've met multiple people at multiple firms over the years that have figured out shortcuts, and we've used outside coaching companies for a variety of things, like even working with Preston on the EOS stuff. That was just like, hey, how do you shorten the distance between point A and point D? You hire a coach. So that's what the outside coaching and mentoring is done for us. It's shortened the whole trajectory and how long it takes you to get through that next ceiling of complexity for sure.
Yeah, Henry, I think it's one thing that Joe said too is I'll speak for myself. I never claim to be the smartest person you're going to speak to, but I'll be the most honest, transparent, and hustle the most. I'll out hustle anyone. And that's the part we can't teach other people, right? So that guy, Joe, we had a guy speak at one of our training meetings. I'm not sure if it's the same guy, Joe, the 2 brothers from Florida. And he asked the audience of advisors, who's making over $3 million a year? And nobody raised their hand. And what he was trying to do is teach you, here's the techniques I use, systemize to get to that level. And some people came up to me that are never going to be successful after it and said, he's bragging, he's boasting. I wanted to take notes. Tell me what he's doing. If he knows that he already designed it, I'm going to copy it, right? And that's what he meant by it. But they took it the wrong way because their expectation is they're never going to make X or whatever. And you got some bad feedback on them. I was trying to be helpful. And then Joe said, we want to copy those people and learn from them and stuff. Neither one of us ever worked someplace. Joe went to a bunch of coaching. We found different ones along the way, and through Joe doing the research, and let's go and listen to them. And sometimes we go to these conferences, we learn more from people that failed. The one we go to is all advisors, same as us, smaller than us, some bigger than us. And sometimes hearing what they did that failed helps us too. So it's not just their successes. So often we learn more outside the classroom than inside at these conferences,
Mm-hmm.
As the two of you look to the future for the firm, what are some of the tests and challenges that are clear, and what are some of the surprises that maybe take up some real estate in the back of your mind? Hidden dangers, if you will. So test challenges and potential hidden dangers. What do those look like?
You want to go first, Joe, or second? He's muted.
Yeah, you can go first.
As we've grown the business, we have staff that's been loyal to us, some for 20 years, let's say. So it went from being John Graziano, hey, when I retire, the typical thing, you sell the practice and you move on. Then Joe comes into the picture. We have other family members, other staff that are with us 20 years. So I've always said, owe it to them that have been loyal to us to grow it. So John at age 62, 65, I want to retire or maybe just take care of my own clients. To get the structure, obviously with Preston's help, the staff in place to understand there's working in a business and there's, managing that business to be successful. So the tools are there. So when I want to phase out, that Joe has a team to help him continue it and so on.
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing in our industry is how everything is wealth management is expanding so much. And that, I always think about what are we not seeing? So right now in our world, we're very blessed by working with the accountants that we're working with. So the potential risk that you had mentioned, Preston, in the future is that there's not a lot of accountants going out and opening their own practices anymore. So that whole demographic of the independent accountant that has one or two partners is sort of aging out. So the risk that we run is what's going to be the next thing that kind of catapult us and continue to get us to move forward. That's something that I think about in the back of my mind is as the accounting firms that have on the independent world that have their own little practices are getting older. What is FFP going to do to kind of pivot and make our next step so that we have kind of a marketing funnel that has worked so well for the last 20 or so years?
You mentioned that, one of you mentioned that a little bit earlier, that it's certainly early on that one of the challenges is just the business development side of things. So just always keeping that pipeline full. And it sounds like that's always I would say a question, but certainly probably one of the top 5 items to always be paying attention to is where's that next opportunity coming from. And I don't know if it's in this light or in that light or another, but if you were, either one of you or both of you were to suggest or share, like, if someone's thinking about getting into business for themselves, whether it's your type of business or another, here's the one most important lesson or a very important lesson you must learn. And if you could learn it earlier, things might turn out a little smoother.
My favorite one, which I'm giving a presentation in Orlando in a few weeks, is think about how you can go, instead of going one to one to many. And what I mean by that is typical advisor has their own practice is trying to go client by client. And the one thing that we solved for is going to an accounting firm. So we're going one to many. So we're spending our marketing money finding accounting firms who can refer us 5, 10, 20 clients a year, as opposed to typical linear thinking is I'm going to go out and get one client at a time, one client at a time, one client at a time. And that's hard. That's a real danger, as you had mentioned. You know what I mean? So how do you solve for that? So what can provide me multiple opportunities as opposed to one at a time?
It's just you're leveraging the relationships. Well, I'll just say it this way. I hear that as like you're less work, bigger benefit.
Yep, we're 10xing it, as some people would say.
There we go.
Mm.
John, anything for you in terms of?
Just I think, Preston, when people are going to leave their full-time employment, their safe route that they have, to do as much as they can, doing the legwork and starting on a part-time basis, so that they're eliminating some of that risk factor, but they need to have a goal or a timeline set for themselves. Otherwise, most people end up doing the 9 to 5 grind, and then the part-time stays part-time forever. But to have the safety net of it, I remember when I started, I had 16 credit cards at my max when I first opened up. There was no backup plan or family that's going to say, here, we'll float you some money and stuff. And then I remember the 1 year I didn't need to borrow money from my mother-in-law. She said, I guess you made it. I said, what are you talking about? She goes, you didn't ask me to borrow money, heading into tax time and stuff. But I think whatever you could do people joke, they tease themselves. So they have many excuses why they can't do something, as we mentioned before, instead of coming up with what's the solution, to get there. Otherwise, you're going to be like everybody else and mope along forever.
I love it.
No moping.
I love it. I've got one more question, Henry. You can kind of bring us to a close here. A book you recommend. So maybe there's recency bias. It's something you just finished or you're working on right now. But if you're say, hey, Preston or Henry, you guys should go read this because it's made a pretty big difference for me. What would that be?
I'll let John go first as he's looking in his credenza there.
That's a rough question, Preston. Henry, I know how to speed read, and I still hate to read, believe it or not. I can read 3 to 4 times the average. I took a class in high school, and I still hate to read. I can never think of the name of the book, Preston. One of our coaches gave me a book to read. I had an employee leave, and they said, John never says hello to me in the morning, whatever. And I purposely go around and say hello, good morning to every single person. Usually I'm here first, so they're not in yet, maybe. But the book, after I read the whole book, it basically said, if you think you're an awesome boss, but that one employee thinks you're an ass, then you're an ass. So, because all they care about is their perspective, which if take that out of context for 1 second, it's important that any business is going to have 3 types of employees. We have one group that's like family, and they're not related, I'm talking about, but they'll do anything to help this business grow. They're invested in us. They want us to succeed. And in return, we owe to take care of them compensation-wise, bonus-wise, safety of the job-wise and stuff. You have a third that is, hey, they're good employees, but they come and go and, whatever. And then you have a third that if somebody offers them $1 more, they're going to leave. I don't need to take care of those employees. But the other 2/3, I certainly need to be aware of their view on things. So Joe and I are making a change. I need to think from their perspective. Is it a positive thing? How does it affect them? How is it positive for them? And I often people get the wrong image of me when I say we make decisions based on the whole firm, not just how it affects that one person. So, that's my thing. Not a book, but just the theory to say you have to be cognizant of everybody that works with you to try to accommodate at least those top 2/3 that you want to be with you for a long time.
That's a great reminder.
Joe's looking through his thousands of books there, by the way. Okay.
I'll go with Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. He's actually the keynote at the conference I'm speaking in about a month, less than a month. That one, and then the other one by Danny Meyer, which I'm drawing a blank on. What's the name of the book on Danny Meyer? He had actually it's called Seat at the Table. That was probably a seat at the table. So we adopted a lot of their concepts. That was an excellent book by Danny Meyer. So those are my 2 favorite.
What's the Unreasonable Hospitality? I imagine that was written in the context of was it Ritz Carlton?
The Unreasonable Hospitality is Will Guidara. He was the owner of 11 Madison Park. And they used the example of the client said everything's great at the Michelin restaurant. One of his examples is that people were talking and said, hey, I never had a hot dog I never got to have a New York City hot dog, and I'm going to the airport after this. And he ran out, got a hot dog, had his fancy chef make it into a hot dog. So just going way, way, way above what anybody could ever imagine on the hospitality front.
And seat at the table, the punchline of that is?
See at the table, the punchline of that is hospitality versus service. Service is what you do to someone, and hospitality is how you make them feel.
That's a great reminder. And that ties into, John, what you said, right?
Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Preston.
Well, no, I mean, it's if the one person believes you're not making them feel a particular way and they call you an ass, then like that's the billboard that gets presented.
Preston, I was at the Ritz, a Ritz in Aruba in the Caribbean a year ago, and they had some issues. Service was terrible. I asked to speak to the manager. I said, did you ever read the Ritz Way or the Ritz, and the manager looked at me dumbfounded that they had no idea. I'm like, well, think about this. Does Ritz know this? Like they didn't know how to fix anything. It's like, I said to my wife, second career when we retire, would you like living here like for like a couple months and see what you can change, their hospitality and their service? Because you go in some places and you just like, instead of fixing it or helping you, we went to the Ritz in Laguna. My wife, we had been there twice, walked in. She goes, oh, I love that scent in this lobby. It's beautiful. Within seconds, they had a candle. The Ritz Laguna has their own scent in the lobby that they pump in. They had a gift for her, a candle, which she must have told 50 million people, right? Now that's the extreme, right? That was awesome compared to the one in Aruba that had no idea what I was talking about with customer service. So, but instilling that in your staff and making them aware of it is the other challenge.
Well, and that may be a future episode for all of us. John, I believe I'm recalling you sharing a story last time we were all together in person about a trip that you were on, and that there was a whole group of folks that
another
took
place.
over.
That's where we're going.
Another
3
place.
weeks. I'm going back there in 3 weeks, Preston. We'll see if it's improved.
I just invited all those people back.
Right. Henry, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. Well, thank you, John and Joe, for being a part of this episode. This was a really, really great conversation. It was really great to learn more about what you guys do and kind of your journey along the way, what kind of inspired it, and eventually what led you guys to work together. Because, like we were saying earlier, being in a family business, as I know as well, has its challenges, has its frustrations, but it also has a lot of bright moments. So, it's very rewarding if you stick with it. So, I hope you guys have a great new year. Have a great 2025. Where can people find your business and get in touch with you guys?
ffpinc.com, or they could look up FFP Inc. on Facebook or any social media. We're there.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, and we hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Preston.
Thanks for having us.